Welcome back, everyone, to the Canadian Baseball Network podcast. The wound still feels fresh, Jackson. I think it will for a while for Blue Jays fans.
Yeah, I've been trying to find perspective, right? These last few days, it's been it's been hard. I'll be honest. What a season for the Blue Jays, no question about that. Um, and I think that if you've been listening to any of these episodes, or if this is your first time listening, either way, we try to be kind of optimistic, but also kind of like being realistic too, which has with the last few years hasn't always been easy. But what a ride they took us on this year, and they didn't get the job done. And so you'll look back on this year and think of it as like a what if. There's always the but. They won the division, they won the pennant, but
Yeah, and that butt is, there are so many, there were so many butts over the course of the last two games, or what ifs, if you want to put it that way. There's plenty of opportunities to win this series throughout. You could argue that the Jays were the more complete team for more parts of the series than not, but at the end of the day, the Dodgers won the four games and they were the better team.
that's going to be the hard part, I think, for Jays fans to come to terms with, is that you probably were the better team. Dodgers had some, maybe the sentiment, I kept seeing was that the Dodgers have the better players, Jays are the better team, right? Certainly played out like that. And you can look back now and yeah, look over a variety of things. Game 6, the play at second base with Barger getting doubled up. Game 7, Varsho up with the bases loaded. The Kiner-Falefa slide has had lots of fan conjecture. You have Yasavage, Hoffman, and Bieber each giving up solo shots. You have so many things. So there's a lot of things we can talk about, and we'll get into here. But yeah, trying to put this into perspective. I was thinking of the David Freese game in 2011. I'm sure you remember that. I that came to my mind on Sunday night. I was just down a dark path, and but I've also been thinking, Matt, about the 2014 Kansas City Royals, who lost in a Game 7 to the Giants. Same kind of vibe, right? Giants were this kind of big time team, had already won, and they won in Game 7. Madison Bumgarner was electric. Bumgarner to Yamamoto, maybe there's a comparison there. And the Royals came right back in 2015 on a mission and were able to get it done and win the World Series. So this run will also be, how we look at this in the future will be dictated, I think, a little bit, Matt, by what this team does. Not a little bit, by what this team does in the next couple years.
Yeah, I think entirely, to a certain, yeah, entirely, because this team wasn't supposed to be in this position. Before the season started, we were talking about if they were going to make the playoffs. We thought this was a wild card team, right? And now that expectation is completely shifted. They re-signed Vladdy to start the year. That kind of cements their commitment to winning and spending money throughout the coming years, probably the next 10 years with Vladdy. And yeah, now the expectation going into 2026 is to be right back here. So it's going to be a big off season for this team. Um, obviously Bo Bichette's going to be the big name for the Blue Jays, but there's other guys out there that they can really bolster this team with, and it's going to be a big few months leading into Dunedin in February.
That's the thing, you think back to 2015 and 16 and how locked in the fan base was, and just people across Canada, new fans and old alike, into what they did in the offseason. And that'll certainly be the case, and I think Rogers has a great chance here. Rogers and the Blue Jays, a great opportunity to really capitalize on this fan interest by doubling down, right? And going out and spending some money and maybe making some trades. I think we'll see both. I think we'll see some free agent acquisitions and some trades, and we'll see how that goes. We'll get into that as the winter goes on. It's a long winter in baseball, and it's going to be a real long winter,
It's
given how
less
the
than
Jays
100
lost.
days. So pitchers and catchers report less than 100 days. I think it's
There you go.
98 or 97 at this point that we're
Getting
recording
there.
this. It's not too long, 3 months. So it's be positive.
Yeah, and so it'll be interesting to see. Obviously there's Bo Bichette. We could talk about that. Maybe we can start there. The 3-run home run, what could have been the ultimate, what a moment that was, and how it will be remembered still, but obviously not quite in the same vein. It would have been looked at in a lot different light if they had held on to win that game, Game 7. And he looked good at second base. You wonder if maybe there's a Marcus Simeon type contract out there for him. That's the comp I'd put on him. And I think Simeon got 8 years at 175 or something like that. So you adjust for inflation, give him 190 or something like that. Maybe there's an opportunity there, or maybe there's a team out there with an owner who wants to make some noise this offseason who puts him at shortstop. We'll see.
Speaking of that, and I was actually thinking about this today for some reason about Bo Bichette. I remember when we had John Morosi on. I think it was right before the
Yeah,
season or right
yeah,
after the season started. And I made the comp of a contract of Bo Bichette and Willie Adames. I think
yeah.
Adames was 8 years, 175 in the 170s. And John Morosi didn't seem so sure about that, but I was pretty confident Bo Bichette having a bounce back here. And I think he well exceeds that at this point. He's going to be well into the 200s, whatever deal he makes. If it's with the Blue Jays, though, is it the most, does it fit the best at second and you have a younger Andres Jimenez and a better defender move to short? Is that something Bo's going to want to do?
Yeah.
How badly does he want to be in Toronto? What are the other suitors? There's a lot of teams that are going to be looking for Bo Bichette's services. I've already seen the Dodgers rumored. Yeah, you look at the Dodgers have already been rumored. You look at the Atlanta Braves, the Chicago Cubs. These are contending teams, right? That are going to maybe push their chips into the middle again this offseason. So how comfortable the Blue Jays paying this money to have him play second base? Is the feeling completely mutual on a return? I think it is. I still think the Jays are the front runner, but there's a lot of questions to be answered on the Bo Bichette front.
And was that the last game we'll see of Vlad and Bo together? Right. I think there was. It's a little emotional. I think if you're a Jays fan, you've been watching these guys for a while. It sort of felt like a given that they'd both be coming back each spring. And they're not young anymore. And man, like Bo came through with some big hits. What a opportunity that was. But like still some great, 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 great memories that we'll have of both Vlad and Bo in the playoffs, in the World Series, of course. Less so for Bo in the playoffs. But um, yeah, the offseason is going to be fascinating. You've also got a 40-man crunch to figure out. If you bring back Bo, where do you put a guy like how does David Schneider get playing time? How does that factor in Nathan Lucas? Where's Ernie Clement? Where's Addison Barger? There's a
And
lot of
on there.
yeah, right. Santander. What's Springer like next year? So there's so many questions.
I think Santander. I said this on a radio interview this past week. Santander is my bounce back candidate. I think he's going to hit 30 plus home runs. I think if he stays healthy, of course, that's obviously the big asterisk in that. But I think he's going to have a big year, and he's going to have to play the outfield. So, like you said, where does that put Addison Barger? Where does Clement go
Yeah.
to second? Barger goes to third. What does that do for Nathan Lucas? George Springer looked really comfortable in the DH spot. So Vladdy's going to need time at DH. So it is going to be questionable. They're not going to be able to move many contracts. I don't think I can't see a Springer or a Santander, either them wanting to move them or anyone willing to take them on.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. I'm curious about what Springer does next year. There's so many questions. That's just on the hitting side. The pitching side too. Um, is Louis Varland a starter next year? Is he a reliever? Bassett and Scherzer are out. You got a lot of money to spend. You go and get a starter. What does that starter look like in free agency? There's a couple guys available. Ranger Suarez, Dylan Cease kind of fit the molds. I know Framber Valdez is out there. I don't think that would be an option for the Jays, just because of maybe the vibes. They're not the best. Look, the one thing that I'll remember too, Matt, about this team is like the culture, right? And the culture they built, the camaraderie they had, and that clearly being communicated via the front office that they wanted that for a long time. They finally got it. The team talked about it. John Schneider talked about that at length. That matters. And clearly that's part of their identity and part of what they've been building towards. That doesn't go away, hopefully, in the years to come. And that's something that should give fans a lot of optimism, is that they've created a culture here that players love to be a part of.
Well, you saw it post game after game seven. You saw Ernie Clement talk about it. You saw Chris Bassett fighting back tears talking about it. You,
Yeah.
you heard the comment, I think it was from Shane Bieber, that one of the toughest parts about losing game seven was that this team's never going to be the same again. There's going to be roster turnover. There's going to be guys coming and going, as there should be. But it is really, I think, with a manager like John Schneider, some of the leadership, you saw Vladdy really turn into a leader throughout this season. I think there's a really good chance that this Kevin Gosman's back, George Springer's back. There's a lot of pieces returning that's going to help keep that culture in place. But yeah, Bieber was right. This team isn't going to be the same next year, and no team ever is.
Well, and Bieber is a interesting topic of conversation too. What does his contract look like? Does he want to stick around? Do the Jays? What does that look like? What does that contract look like? Will be really interesting to see. Because if he opts out, there's not the starting pitching market is pretty good, but there's I think a lot of candidates that are kind of bounce back candidates, like Dylan Cease. Valdez will be an interesting market. Zach Gallen, he's coming off a bad year,
Shane
so
Bieber's in that category. I mean,
yeah,
he
sure,
went through
yeah,
the typical up and down Tommy John recovery, and it just happened to be in August, September, and October where
yeah,
it's under the microscope. If that happened April to June,
yeah.
he would be a different guy come July and August and into the playoffs. But I'm curious. I'm guessing I haven't seen anything. I've seen guys opting out of their options already. I haven't seen anything on Shane Bieber. I'm curious if there's been any thought for him to pick up that option and rebuild his market with a full season in Toronto, working with Pete Walker on a team that he's seemed to really like to be a part of. I don't know. I think it's a $12 million option, so that might be a little bit on the cheaper end for him. But I'm curious if the Jays that gets worked out, with the Jays over the course of the offseason, whether it's a contract extension or that option being picked up. I think he's another guy that's going to have a big year next year. He'll be back to pre Tommy John Shane Bieber. We saw glimpses of it throughout the playoffs. The stuff is still there. And again, he went through some of those ups and downs that you see from everyone, almost that comes back from Tommy John surgery. So if I'm the Jays, I'd be real interested in bringing Shane Bieber back.
Yeah. So they have a ton of money to spend. They have a ton of money to spend. Obviously, Rogers just made a boatload of cash off of this run, both at the gate and revenue wise, and just kind of brand awareness throughout the country. You saw the amount of people watching out west, out east. That also helps too when you're Canada's only team, and like shattering like crazy records on TV, Matt. Like they most views on a broadcast since the 2010 Canada USA gold medal game in Vancouver.
Yeah,
Like it's crazy,
I think the
crazy.
whole
So they're gonna have money to spend for sure.
I think the whole narrative around the Canada's team can't draw was just put to bed.
Oh yeah,
I'm curious if the Jays getting national probably not still, but if the Jays getting national broadcast games in the United States next year. I don't know if that's Fox or I don't
yeah,
know
or
what's going to happen
ESPN.
with Sunday
Yeah.
Night Baseball, but and again, I'm not going to be a TV expert. I don't know exactly how that worked with U.S. markets and whatnot, but I mean, you can't deny the number of eyeballs that were on this World Series, both in the United States and in Canada.
That was incredible. And kudos to the Sportsnet broadcast too. It was exceptional. I was watching that. Why not support Canadian television, right? Of course, Fox did the national feed in the States, and you could watch it up here as well. But overall, yeah, the ratings were incredible. Tens of millions of people watching. So the point is, they're going to have a lot of money. They should have a lot of money. And you think about how it works, for next year, Matt, the interest that advertisers will have in wanting to be, throughout the year uh, on the Jays broadcast as well. So there will be a lot of money to be made. Point is, they should be active in free agency. They should be active on the trade market. It's going to be a fun offseason. And I think if ownership was motivated this past offseason and off seasons prior with not a lot of without any playoff results, I can't even imagine what ownership is going to be like, because this is a different ownership group than your older brother's Blue Jays or your dad's Blue Jays. Like this is not Interbrew anymore, right? This team is going to
And
spend some money.
yeah, this is not Labatt Blue Jays baseball anymore.
No,
Like
no, no, no.
I think that was the mid 2000s. But again, and the other part of that is players were watching this. They all,
Yeah,
they're watching the series. They're watching the atmosphere at Rogers Center. There's always kind of been this negative connotation around playing in Canada. Playing in a different country, border, all that customs, all that kind of stuff. But you have the foundational piece in Vladimir Guerrero Jr. You have the owner in Edward Rogers that says he's going to spend money and wants to bring a championship to Canada. And you have a team that, you know, the way they play the game is built for success. I
yeah.
mean, they play the game the right way. Is that going to attract? Are they a couple pieces away from really being a dominant force for years to come? Could be, and I think a lot of that will be on the pitching side this offseason. I think they're going to need a couple starters and a couple bullpen arms, especially if Varland goes to the rotation.
Yeah.
It's going to be real interesting. But I saw someone tweet today, and I can't remember who it was. Ross Atkins should do the fan base a favor and just make a big splash here in November. Wouldn't that be something? Just to build on the momentum through the offseason? Because the MLB offseason is historically been very slow to move.
Yeah.
It would be really cool to see something big happen over the next few weeks.
Two things on that: the culture that we talked about earlier and how that could play into attracting free agents. Not every free, obviously, money talks, but if the money is similar and you get to go to a team like the Jays who were on the doorstep of beating the Dodgers, in a fun division to play in, I think that will be, and look, you're playing for a country. Clearly, they would see the passion and talk to guys. Players talk, right? So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. And it's also a potential lockout situation too on the horizon. So how does that play into free agency? Do you guys sign 1-year deals? Do guys sign longer term because they want the security? I don't know how that all works or what players will want or what agents will want, but it's going to be, I think, an interesting offseason from that perspective.
I'm
Um,
curious if that's why some of these players are opting out.
yeah, maybe
Looking long term, are they trying to get their big long contract before the CBA?
before. Mhm.
Um, yeah, that's going to be real interesting. Let's not talk about 2027 because that could get real ugly.
That would also motivate you more, Matt, to spend this offseason for the Jays. Because let's say 2020, I'm just going worst case scenario. If there isn't baseball in 27, that's a year wasted of Vlad's prime. That's a year wasted of a lot of primes on this team, and a lot. It's a huge waste. Obviously, we don't want that. No one wants to see that, of course. Just thinking ahead, though, maybe that is just a little bit in the back of your mind. Hey, let's make sure we really have a good, solid team and spend some money this offseason in the hopes of building something special in 26 in case that
yeah,
happens.
yeah, I'm really curious to see what they do this offseason. Like we talked about some pitchers that are on the market. The position player side, there are guys. I saw Reese Hoskins option got, I think, denied or he didn't pick it up. Kyle Schwarber, but those are a lot of like first base types, right? Like a lot of the big bashers seem to be on the first base / DH side of
Yeah.
things. They're not going to be in the Kyle Tucker market. Um,
No.
yeah, so it's going to be really interesting. I think Bo is really the big piece on the offensive side that they would like to add or
Yeah.
rehab or keep, however you want to put it. But I think a lot of it's going to be done on the pitching side. That's going to be a lot of the heavy lifting.
Maybe that's your November splash. It's Bo Bichette, right? I think that'd be pretty sweet. And you mentioned 200 million, whatever it is. If it's one, I think Spot Track projected it to be 189 or something. Like maybe you just saw it off and say, hey, we had a great year financially. You're a homegrown kid. We love everything about you. Here's 200 million. Here's 210, whatever. But
It
that'll
could
be
be
interesting to see.
it could be a perfect storm,
Yeah.
for this to happen at this point for Bo Bichette, and it just seems like a natural fit to bring him back. But I mean that assumes that both sides have equal interest in doing so.
Yeah, and Bo has talked about at length at wanting to be here, wanting to be in Toronto, wanting to win in Toronto. So them losing as close as they did maybe makes it more enticing for him to come back and kind of run it back next year with Vlad and everyone else. Because especially with the way he played pretty well in the World Series. He couldn't run, but he could do everything else. He could hit and made some nice plays at second base. That's for sure.
I want to go back to the series for a little bit
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because was it? Do you think it's more frustrating for Blue Jays fans? Obviously, the way they lost was heartbreaking, but they lost on little mistakes.
Mhm.
And that's something that this team did so well not doing all year. You go back to game 6, Barger getting doubled off. You go back to what was it, game 3, Bo Bichette getting doubled off on the Varsho strikeout. Game 7, uh, Springer did it. He thought Vladdy had walked on a clip pitch that was clearly a strike. And these are, you might say that was in the first inning. What does that have to do with the out? But you never know what run is going to be the difference in a game like that. And then, the Varsho at bat, not scoring the run. IKF's lead, you could argue whether it was big enough or not. Ernie Clement popping the ball up in game 6 in the 9th inning. I mean, a lot of things that this team did, and I don't want to dump on Ernie Clement because he had a historic postseason, but a lot of things that this team did really well to get to that point seemed to cost them in the end, which seems such a weird turn for this series to take.
You remember the runners in scoring position discourse and then like 2022, 23. Man, they could not cash. I looked at too, like you think about some of the performances of some guys. Dalton Varsho seems to come up in every big spot in games 6 and 7. It just was horrendous. Awful performance in
I
game
think
six
they're
and seven.
4 for 26 with
Yeah.
runners in scoring position in the final 2 games of that series.
Yeah. So there's
Again,
that.
it's a team that's prided itself on playing the game the right way, and the more I think about it and go back and relive this series, it just seems like they didn't execute the way they usually play the game, and it ended up costing them in the slimmest of margins, which is tough to swallow.
The lead, the kind of Falefa lead discourse. I don't know where you stand on that. The taking the lead. I thought my issue, the lead is one thing. I think the slide. Why not run through or slide head first? I know that's hindsight, but uh, I'm no baseball coach. But I'm just looking at it thinking, like, not that it doesn't display urgency. It's a forced play, but why aren't you kind of like, this is to win the World Series? If you were ever going to go all out, is this not the time? And then it comes back also though, even prior to that, like you have one out, Dalton Varsho at the plate. You just need a fly ball. You just need a fly ball. And then we wouldn't be talking about this. We'd be talking about how it feels to be a world champion if you're the Jays right now. So that part was really hard for me to come to terms with on Sunday night too.
On the IKF lead,
Or Saturday night. Sorry, Saturday night.
yeah, I just don't. I just can't get behind and not getting doubled off. I think the chances of Dalton Varsho lining a ball at Max Muncy at third base. I think Chris Black of Sportsnet did a breakdown of how frequently that's happened. And I think Varsho has lined out to third base like 4 times, and it's like, and 3 of them were softly hit. And I mean, like this was going back to his days in Arizona. I don't know. It was over like hundreds of at bats. He had done it like 4 times, and like 3 of them were like soft liners that you're probably getting back. I think it's just, if you want to play, it's a game of analytics and numbers and probabilities, and I just don't see how the probable play on that is to not get doubled off. That's your first thought, but being the winning run in the World Series.
I was going to say, especially given you're kind of looking at the risk reward there. The reward, you have one out. Yeah, you don't want to get doubled off, of course. But man, like, isn't
And
the
Maxi
result that we ended up with worse anyways?
and Muncy, sorry, Maxi, combining my names here. Muncy wasn't that close to the bag.
Mm-mm.
Like he wasn't way off, but like if you freeze on a liner like you're supposed to, and your first instinct is back in that situation because the ball gets by him, you're obviously scoring. I just don't see how you couldn't get a bigger lead there, but yeah, that's a tough one. That picture of Will Smith and him sliding into home is going to live in infamy until this team eventually wins the World Series.
Yeah, there's so many things. Game 6 was a whole other beast. You mentioned Clement with the uh, swing into the first pitch and on his hands. Uh, Barger getting doubled up. He just obviously lost where he was on the bases. Yeah, you made a good point about the details and about how they had really stressed the details all year. And then, kind of in the biggest moments of the season when you need those the most, it felt like at points the details were missing just a little bit. Uh, or even I look at too, less of a details thing, but Jeff Hoffman was so good all postseason. All postseason, he was so good, shutting games down. I mean, that was probably the most heading into that 9th inning on Saturday night, Matt. That was probably the most confident I've been in Hoffman this whole season.
And you
I
got eight
thought,
nine one coming up. You got eight
yeah, eight
nine
nine one,
off the
yeah,
inning. Yeah, but the home runs got him all year. I mean,
yeah,
looking back now, you can't really be that surprised.
no,
And just to go back to the Barger one for a minute, I think that's just did his youthfulness just get the better of him? He was
yeah,
clearly being over aggressive, not knowing where your outfielders are. I mean, Kike Hernandez didn't pull that off his shoe tops. He caught it at his shoulder. I mean,
mm,
it was clearly being caught. It was a bad read. It was over aggressiveness,
yes,
and maybe a little bit of youthful enthusiasm that cost him that. But
yeah.
yeah, and then back to Jeff Hoffman. I mean, who had Miguel Rojas doing that? He didn't even start the first 4 games of the series or 5 games of the series. Um, yeah, if anything, you would have thought Otani coming up on deck was a big matchup, and Hoffman unfortunately did what he's done so many times this year and gave up a home run. So, but yeah, so good in the postseason. And if you have that opportunity again, he's going to be back out there if you could do it all over again. But yeah, just a tough way to lose. The more I go back and analyze it, it
Yeah.
seems like the tougher it gets.
It's brutal. It's painful. There's nothing. It's as bad as it gets. I've listened to people. Look, it's been talked about at length. I think that's kind of why we started talking a little more about stuff that maybe hasn't been discussed as much, like kind of trying to look ahead because frankly, this is pretty tough to talk about. How close they were, and there's a fire alarm going somewhere out there. Not in here, thankfully. But yeah, I really just can't. I can't wrap my head around how close they were. And this slide, just seeing the slow mo of Smith's foot go above the plate and then back down. It's as if his foot is like on my neck right there, and it's like, oh my god, it was so close. But I come back to so many different things. There are so many ways that and so you kind of think about it. Well, there were so many ways they didn't get it done. Maybe it wasn't meant to be, you know, is honestly how you kind of come back to it and you try to move forward. But look, I'll say this too, Matt. I saw this with a couple people. It'll make next season all the more interesting. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this before. You look at the Arizona Diamondbacks that made the World Series a few years ago. You have the Texas Rangers that won the World Series. They haven't been back since. So, there's no guarantee that this team
Yeah.
gets back to where they are, but there's definitely a lot of optimism that they will get back to the playoffs, and I think they're going to spend to do so. And baseball doesn't wait around, right? The offseason stuff's already kicking up. It'll be February before you know it, and we'll be going diving right back into this thing. So it's an exciting time for Blue Jays fans. A lot of good things. You're going to raise an American League Championship banner. So, you can kind of hang your hat on that. But yeah, it's just it's going to be a tough one to get over the next 3 months.
Yeah, this is just one of those things that I think will always stick with Jays fans. It'll be like I said at the beginning, 2025, what a year, right? You'll learn so much about some guys in this team, huge breakouts like Ernie Clement, Barger, Nathan Lucas, Kirk with a nice bounce back year, Vlad signing the extension and what he did in the playoffs. That was legendary. Ernie Clement's postseason. It'll always have the but, right? And again, we'll see how the future, we might see this in a softer light in 2 years if they win a World Series or two. Of course, you look at the team they played. The Dodgers had a lot of playoff runs that didn't end in a World Series. A lot of playoff runs. Now, in the Shohei Ohtani era, it's a little different, but that's besides the point. One more thing, Matt. I know we're going to wrap up soon. You mentioned, we talked about Ernie Clement, the postseason hits record. He's hitting eighth. I know you don't want to have two lefties at the bottom of your order, but it was so tough for me to see what happened with Varsho at bat in the bottom of the ninth. He hits the grounder to Rojas. The play at the plate happens with IKF. And then Clement hits a deep fly ball. If Clement and Varsho were switched, the Jays are world champions right now. That for me is one of the tougher pills to swallow as well. But it's, of course, super revisionist history. Does he hit a fly ball in that spot, etc.? The point is, I'm seeing a guy get 30 postseason hits and beat a Rosarena's record, and he's hitting eighth behind Dalton Varsho, who went 0 for 9 in the two biggest games of the season. That is also something that will stick with me, possibly forever, Matt.
Yeah, I think, it's a matter of not wanting to change it, what was
Yes.
working up to that point. Yeah, there's a lot of things to digest and will be talked about over and over again throughout this offseason. And, if the Jays don't win a World Series in the next few years for a long time to come. But, if you want to look at the positives, it was a big step forward for the organization
Yes.
this year. So, we're going to have lots of content coming up over the off season, both, Blue Jays, Major League Baseball, and otherwise. We're excited for what we have to come. Hopefully make the off season not so dim and dark and cold. Um, Again, a great season for the Blue Jays. Unfortunately, it didn't end the way that they wanted or the fans wanted, but they'll be back in February. Until next time, take care.